I hate Thursdays. There's something dull about them. It's not the middle of the week, but it's not Friday yet. When I used to teach, Thursdays used to be test days. For 32 years, I checked notebooks on Thursdays. And even now, 3 years after retirement, I still wake up thinking about unchecked physics problems. My name is Edmund Hickman, 65 years old, 32 of which I taught physics at Socorro High School. Widower. I'm looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror now. Deep wrinkles around my eyes. Gray hair that's getting fewer and fewer. Linda used to say those wrinkles were from laughing. Linda always knew how to find something good even in the obvious signs of aging. Linda, my wife. Gone 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed too late. I remember the doctor talking about the chances, the possible cure, but his eyes told the truth. No hope. 2 months of agony and then silence. Such a deafening silence in the house where we'd lived for 37 years. I turn on the electric razor. The buzzing fills the void, but not for long. After Linda's death, I quit teaching high school. I didn't see the point of explaining the laws of conservation of energy to teenagers when all my energy seemed to have gone with her. But a year later, I started giving private lessons, not so much for money as to fill the empty evenings. I had enough in my pension and savings, especially now that I was eating mostly frozen dinners and coffee. Shit, I cut myself, distracted by the memory. The small drop of blood on my chin is a minor pain, almost unnoticeable against the emptiness that has settled inside. The kitchen greets me with the usual mess: an unwashed cup from last night's coffee, a plate of leftover toast. Linda wouldn't approve. She always kept the house in perfect order. I turn on the coffee maker, pull out the only clean kitchen towel. It's embroidered with "To the Best Dad," a Father's Day gift from Elaine about 15 years ago. She was still doing that then. Elaine, my only daughter, 37 years old, married to a guy named Noah. Works for an insurance company, does some kind of corporate sales. To be honest, I don't really understand what exactly she does, although she tried to explain. Not that we talked much, mostly on the phone and usually when she needs something. I stare out the window, sipping my coffee. Socorro has never been a big city, but it's always seemed cozy to me. Our house is on a quiet street overlooking the San Mateo Mountains. In the spring, the mountains are covered with flowers, and Linda always insisted we have picnics. "Eddie," she used to say, "you can't live near such beauty and not enjoy it." The telephone interrupts my musings. Elaine's number. I glance at my watch. 9:30 in the morning. "Strange," she usually calls in the evening. "Hello." My voice sounds hoarse after a night of silence. "Hi, Dad." Elaine's voice sounds a little too cheerful. I immediately realize she wants something. In 37 years, I've learned to recognize those intonations. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I answer. "You're early today." "Oh, I'm calling before work. Listen, we're having a little family event. It's Noah's birthday on Saturday, his 35th birthday, and we're having a family dinner." I was expecting a follow-up. Usually these calls ended with a request for money. "Dad, we have a burst pipe. Could you help pay for the plumber?" Or, "Dad, we need to replace the brake pads. Could you lend some money until payday?" And I've always helped. Always. "And we wanted to invite you," Elaine continued after a pause. "There'll be Noah's family, a few of our friends. At the Moonlight Restaurant, you know the one?" Of course I did. It's the most expensive restaurant in Socorro. It opened a couple years ago and the prices were unreasonable. Linda and I preferred the modest Martha's on Main Street. "I know," I said. "Sounds good." "Great. Saturday, 7 o'clock then. You know the address, don't you?" I could hear the impatience in her voice, as if she was in a hurry to finish the conversation. "Yes, I do." I paused. "How's Noah? How's work going?" "I'm fine, Dad, but I'm in a hurry. I gotta go. I'm late. I'll see you Saturday." And she hung up. No, "How are you doing?" No, "What are you up to?" Typical conversation with my daughter over the years. Sighing, I put the cup in the sink. It was odd that Elaine hadn't asked for money. Usually, our conversations didn't go without it. Perhaps something had changed. I didn't want to hope, but a small flame of hope flickered inside nonetheless. After breakfast, I went to the garage. There, among the boxes of old things and tools, was my telescope, a 60th birthday present from my teacher colleagues. I had rarely used it, especially since Linda's death. But today, for some reason, I wanted to get it out to see if it was in working order. Maybe I could look at the stars at night. The telescope was covered in dust, but otherwise seemed in good working order. I carefully wiped the lenses, checked the mounts. In the process, I discovered an old photo I'd used as a bookmark in the manual. Elaine, about 10 years old, at the school science fair. She was standing next to her homemade volcano, smiling proudly at the camera. I helped her with this project. We spent several evenings mixing baking soda and vinegar, getting the lava to the right consistency. Back then, she still wanted to be a scientist, dreaming of space, of galaxies far away. When and how did that change? When did her passion for science change to an obsession with money and status? In the afternoon, I had 2 students, the Perry twins, studying for their final exams. Smart kids, but they weren't doing well in physics. After class, I went to the grocery store where I ran into Beverly Thornton, a neighbor who lived 3 houses down from me. "Edmund, I haven't seen you in a while," she smiled, fixing a gray strand of hair. Beverly was a widow like me. Her husband died the year before Linda. "How are you doing?" "I'm hanging in there, Beverly," I tried to smile. "How are you?" "I joined a gardening club. You know, at my age, it's still possible to learn how to grow orchids." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Beverly had always been able to move on, to find new interests, new people. Unlike me, stuck in the past. "You could join a club too, Edmund," she said, as if she'd read my mind. "There's an astronomy group at the community center. You'd like that, you're a physics teacher." "I was a teacher," I corrected. "Maybe I'll stop by sometime." We said goodbye, and I headed home with a bag of groceries. Beverly was right. I should have found something to do besides tutoring and watching old movies at night. But every time I thought about it, a strange weariness took over. Linda was always the initiator of new beginnings in our family. Without her, life became routine, a series of identical days. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and toast, I thought about Elaine's invitation. Something about that call was strange. She didn't usually invite me to family events, especially those involving Noah's family. His parents, Hiram and Doris Berkeley, had always struck me as overly pompous. In our rare encounters, they looked at me as a second-class citizen, just a school teacher, not like their son working for some big corporation. I turned on the TV, switching channels without much interest, stopped on a documentary about deep-sea creatures. About halfway through the movie, the phone rang again. "Elaine." "Dad, I forgot to ask," she began without greeting. "You're coming in the car, aren't you?" "Yeah, why?" "Just checking. Also, did you know that Moonlight is a pretty formal place? You're going to have to dress appropriately." "I have a suit, Elaine." I felt slightly annoyed. "The same one I taught in for 32 years and buried your mother in." There was an awkward pause. "I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't mean to." Her voice got quieter. "I just wanted to make sure everything was going to be okay." "Everything's going to be okay," I replied, feeling the irritation give way to fatigue. "Is there anything else?" "No, nothing," she paused. "I'll see you Saturday." Hanging up the phone, I wondered. Why did she have to be so specific about the car and the clothes? Something was wrong here, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I went back to the movie, but my thoughts were far away. I remembered how 3 months ago Elaine and Noah had asked me for $12,000 for a down payment on a new SUV. I withdrew the money from my retirement account even though it meant an early withdrawal penalty. Elaine promised to pay it back, but of course that didn't happen. Just like with the money to renovate their kitchen a year ago, and with paying for their wedding 10 years ago. I once thought I was helping my daughter get back on her feet, giving her a better life than I had. Now I realized I was just letting her get used to using me as an ATM machine. But what could I do? Refuse? She's my only daughter, my only child, all I have left after Linda. Thinking about it, I didn't notice the movie was over. The credits flashed on the screen and I sat there staring into space. Then I turned off the TV and went to the bedroom. On the bedside table was a picture of Linda, smiling, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I had taken that picture a year before her illness, during our trip to the mountains. Linda said at the time, "Eddie, when I'm gone, remember that life goes on. Don't let sadness overshadow everything else." I didn't keep that promise. I got caught up in work, then in routine, shutting myself off from the world. Maybe it's time to change that. Maybe it's time to start living again, even at 65. With this thought, I went to bed, but sleep didn't come for a long time. Elaine's face was in front of me, not the grown woman using her father, but the little girl who had once looked at me with adoration and trust. Somewhere along the way, we had lost that connection, and I wasn't sure if it could be restored. The next day, I woke up late. The sun was already high in the sky, illuminating the room through the loosely drawn curtains. Friday, a day with no classes with students. Getting out of bed, I mechanically performed the morning ritual, washed my face, shaved, made coffee. Then I decided to do something unusual. Instead of sitting at home, I went to the city library. Socorro's library was small but cozy. I picked out a few books on astronomy, remembering Beverly's words about the stargazing club. Maybe I should really go there. I didn't have to join right away, I could just see how their meetings went. Back home, I spent the rest of the day reading. Books about space reminded me of why I once chose physics. It wasn't just the science of formulas and laws, but about understanding the universe, its mysteries and beauty. At some point, I caught myself thinking that for the first time in a long time, I felt a slight excitement, an interest in something new. In the evening, Elaine called again. "Dad, just reminding you about dinner tomorrow night." Her voice sounded strangely tense. 7 p.m. Moonlight. "I remember, Elaine," I replied. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, sure," she answered a little too quickly. "Just checking in. Noah's really glad you're coming." It was a blatant lie. Noah had never been excited about my presence. From the beginning of their relationship, he'd treated me with barely concealed disdain. Perhaps because I didn't fit his idea of the right test. I wasn't rich or powerful, couldn't open the doors to high society for them. "I'm glad to see Noah, too," I lied back. "I'll see you tomorrow." After the call, the anxiety returned. Why was Elaine so insistent on my presence? Why had she been so specific about the car and the clothes? Something told me that tomorrow night would be more than just a family dinner. I picked up one of the astronomy books and walked out onto the back porch. The night was clear and the stars shone brightly over Socorro. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, was a universe full of wonder and mystery. I sat looking up and thought about Linda's words. Life goes on. Maybe it was just beginning for me? With that strange but hopeful thought, I went back into the house and went to bed. Tomorrow was an important day, and something told me that it could change a lot of things in my life. Saturday came unexpectedly quickly. I woke up earlier than usual, with a heavy feeling in my chest, as if it were not a family celebration, but a test. The clock read 6 in the morning, 13 hours until dinner, but I was already feeling anxious. I made coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the San Mateo Mountains, colored pink by the morning sun. The day promised to be clear. Linda loved days like this. We often went on picnics, took little Elaine with us, spread out a blanket, and spent hours talking and watching the clouds. It's strange how one's relationship with one's own child changes. When Elaine was little, she looked at me with admiration, as if I knew the answers to everything in the world. I remember explaining to her why the sky was blue, how rainbows worked, why the wind blew. She listened with her mouth open, and it seemed to me that nothing was more important than those moments. And now? Now I'm just an old man with a pension and savings, someone to call when the car breaks down or the roof leaks, but not someone you call to share your joy or just to talk. When exactly did things change? It probably started when Elaine went to college in Albuquerque. I remember the day Linda and I drove her to campus, a car full of boxes of stuff, a dorm room she was to share with a strange girl. Elaine was so excited, so full of hope. Linda and I were happy for her too, even though we knew we would miss her. College was expensive. Linda and I had been saving for years for our daughter's education, but we still had to take out a loan. I never mentioned this to Elaine. I didn't want her to feel like a burden. We wanted her to have all the opportunities we didn't have. For the first year, she called often, talking about her studies, about her new friends. She would visit on weekends, bringing stacks of textbooks and dirty laundry. Linda and I were happy every time she came, every time she called. Then the calls got less frequent. The visits got shorter. There were new friends, new interests. It's normal, Linda said, part of growing up. But I felt I was losing touch with my daughter, and it bothered me. In her third year, Elaine met Noah. He was 2 years older, studying business administration, and came from a family much more affluent than ours. I remember the first time Elaine brought him to our house for dinner. He was polite, but there was something insincere about his politeness, as if he was condescending to socialize with us. After dinner, when Elaine went out to help Linda with dessert, Noah asked me how much I made as a teacher. The question caught me off guard, and I remember mumbling something about how working in education wasn't about money, but about impacting future generations. He nodded as if I had confirmed his worst suspicions. Linda immediately disliked Noah, though she tried to hide it for Elaine's sake. "There's no heart in him, Eddie," she told me after they left. "He looks at people as things useful or useless." I wanted to believe she was wrong, that it was just prejudice. After all, Elaine had chosen him, and I trusted her judgment. But the years have shown that Linda was right. When Elaine announced her engagement during her senior year of college, Linda and I pretended to be overjoyed. We wanted our daughter to be happy, and if Noah was her choice, we had to honor that. The wedding was lavish and expensive. Noah's parents insisted on it, even though technically the cost was to be borne by us as parents of the bride. I remember a conversation with Hiram Berkeley, Noah's father, when he offered to help with the expenses if we couldn't pull it off. There was so much condescension in his voice that I instantly decided we could manage on our own. Linda and I took out a loan against the house. We spent almost all of our savings. But the wedding was exactly what Elaine wanted, with 300 guests, 5-star catering, and a honeymoon in Hawaii. After the wedding, Elaine and Noah moved to Socorro. Noah was transferred to the local branch of his company. I was excited to have my daughter around, hoping we would grow closer again. But that didn't happen. They bought a house in a new neighborhood on the opposite side of town. We saw each other rarely, mostly on holidays, and each meeting seemed more and more strained. Then Linda got sick. 4 years ago, out of the blue. Elaine came to the hospital, but rarely and not for long. Always in a hurry, always busy with work, home, her life. When Linda died, Elaine organized the funeral, efficiently like a business meeting. She was there for me that day, but I felt that emotionally she was somewhere far away. After the funeral, our relationship became even more distant. Elaine called once a week, then once a month, and then only when she needed something. Car broke down, needed money for repairs, decided to renovate the kitchen. Could I help pay for it? They want a new SUV, can I give them money for a down payment? And I always said yes, because Elaine was all I had left. Because I couldn't say no to my daughter, even if I knew she was using me. because I was too afraid of being all alone. Looking at my watch, I found myself sitting by the window for over an hour, engrossed in my memories. It was going to be a long day, and I needed something to do. I decided to tidy up my suit for the evening out. My only suit was hanging in my closet, neatly packed in a garment bag. The last time I'd worn it was for Linda's funeral. Before that, Elaine's graduation. The dark blue fabric had faded a little at the shoulders, but overall the suit looked presentable. The shirt needed ironing, and the tie. I suddenly realized that I didn't remember how to tie a tie. For the last 3 years of high school, I had only worn sweaters or shirts with the collar unbuttoned. I had to look up the instructions on the internet. 40 minutes and 5 attempts later, the tie was tied. Not perfectly, but acceptable. I looked at myself in the mirror, a 65-year-old man with thinning gray hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes. It can't get any better than this, I thought, and took off my suit so it wouldn't wrinkle before the evening. I spent the rest of the day leafing through the astronomy books I borrowed from the library. The pictures of distant galaxies, nebulae, and star clusters were mesmerizing. I remembered my childhood dream of becoming an astronomer, but in the small town where I grew up, it seemed like a pipe dream. High school physics was the closest available approximation to the stars. At 5 o'clock, I started getting ready. I showered, shaved thoroughly, put my suit back on. All movements were mechanical, as if I was preparing not for a family dinner but for a funeral. Maybe, in a way, I was. A funeral for my illusions that my relationship with my daughter could be restored. At 6:30, I got in the car. My old Ford looked out of place next to modern SUVs and sports cars, but it had served me faithfully for the past 15 years. I turned on the radio for the local news and weather report. The familiar voice of the announcer, recounting the minor happenings of Socorro, was oddly soothing. The journey to the restaurant took about 20 minutes. Moonlight was located in a new neighborhood of the city, among glass office buildings and trendy boutiques. The modern 2-story building with panoramic windows and neon signage was a stark contrast to the traditional architecture of old Socorro. A young man in uniform stood at the entrance offering valet parking. I reluctantly handed him the keys to my shabby Ford and entered the restaurant. Inside, Moonlight lived up to its pretentious facade. Dim lighting, snow-white tablecloths on the tables, soft classical music, waiters in strict suits. At the reception desk stood a young woman with a clipboard. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked with a professional smile. "Yes, under the name Berkeley or Hickman, I'm not sure," I replied, suddenly realizing I didn't know whose name Elaine had a reservation under. The woman looked at the list on the clipboard. "Berkeley, table for 8. Your company has already arrived. Let me show you out." I followed her across the room, feeling out of place in my old suit among the elegant crowd. She led me to a large round table in the far corner of the hall where several people were already seated. Elaine noticed me first. She was in a dark red dress with neat hair and makeup that made her look older than her 37 years. Sitting next to her was Noah in a gray suit that I was sure cost more than my monthly pension. "Daddy." Elaine stood up and walked over to me. "You made it." She hugged me and I could smell the expensive perfume. The hug was brief and mechanical, as if she were performing a mandatory ritual. "Of course you came," I replied. "I promised." "Meet everyone." Elaine turned back to the table. "You know Noah's parents, Hiram and Doris." The older couple nodded to me without much enthusiasm. Hiram was tall, with gray hair and cold blue eyes. Doris, a thin woman with perfect styling and a strained smile, nodded faintly. "And this is Noah's sister, Agatha, and her husband Wesley," Elaine continued, pointing to the young couple across the hall. Agatha was a younger copy of her mother, the same cold eyes, the same strained smile. Wesley, a large man with a budding bald spot, nodded at me with the look of someone who didn't care who I was. And of course, the birthday boy, Elaine pointed to Noah, who raised his wine glass in my direction. Happy birthday, Noah, I said, sitting down in the only empty seat between Agatha and the empty chair. Thank you, Edmund, Noah replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The waiter immediately came to the table, offering a menu. I took the leather folder and almost choked when I saw the prices. The cheapest dish cost as much as I spent on groceries for a week. Order whatever you want, Noah announced, addressing everyone but me. Today was a special day. I chose the pasta with mushrooms, one of the most inexpensive dishes on the menu, though it seemed like an unacceptable luxury. The others ordered steaks, lobster, and a bottle of wine that I was sure cost more than my monthly pension. The conversation at the table was about things I didn't understand much about. Hiram talked about the stock market, Wesley bragged about his new yacht, Agatha talked about her recent trip to Paris. I sat in silence, feeling like an outsider at this celebration of life. "And how are you, Edmund?" Doris suddenly turned to me, as if she'd remembered the rules of decorum. "Did Elaine tell me you were retired?" "Yes, for 3 years now," I replied, "but I'm still giving private physics lessons." "That's nice." Her tone made it clear that she didn't think it was a worthy occupation. "What else do you do?" I wanted to answer that I was trying to get over the loss of my wife and the estrangement of my daughter, but instead I said, "Reading, watching documentaries. I've recently gotten interested in astronomy." "Dad always loved science," Elaine put in, as if trying to justify me to these people. "He was a great teacher, and many of his students went on to prestigious universities." I looked at my daughter in surprise. She had never praised my profession before. She usually treated it with a slight disdain, as if being a teacher was something shameful. "Education is a noble profession," Hiram said, as if he were talking about cleaning sewers. "Though, of course, not the most lucrative." "Not everything is measured in money," I said, trying not to show my irritation. Sure, Hiram smiled indulgently. "Although, it's nice to have a financial cushion in your old age, too." I felt Elaine tense up beside me. She cast a quick glance at Noah, who nodded faintly. "Dad's doing okay financially," she said a little too quickly. "Really, Dad?" I didn't bother to clarify that doing okay meant a modest teacher's pension and a small savings that kept melting away thanks to Elaine and Noah's emergencies. "I'm not complaining," he replied briefly. The waiter brought appetizers, and the conversation, to my relief, turned to other topics. Agatha was talking about the plans for remodeling their country house. Doris was discussing some charity ball she and Hiram were going to next month. I ate in silence, nodding occasionally when someone addressed me directly. Elaine seemed tense, glancing at me often as if expecting something. Noah, sitting across from me, was the center of attention, talking about some big contract his company had recently signed. After the appetizers, the main courses arrived. My pasta with mushrooms looked modest compared to the huge steaks and lobsters of the others. Hiram ordered another bottle of wine, more expensive than the previous one. "To Noah," he proclaimed, raising his glass. "To my son, who has accomplished more in his 35 years than many have in a lifetime." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine, too, though I drank only water. I'd never liked alcohol, and I'd stopped drinking it after Linda's death. "And to our growing family," Doris added, looking meaningfully at Elaine and Noah. Elaine blushed slightly, and Noah put his arm around her shoulders. I looked at my daughter questioningly. "We were going to announce later," Elaine said, looking at me, "but since Noah's mom brought up the subject, we're expecting a baby." I felt something tighten in my chest. A baby. I'm going to be a grandfather. Strangely, my first thought was, I wish Linda had lived to see this moment. "That's wonderful," I said, trying to collect my thoughts. "Congratulations to both of you." "Thanks, Dad." Elaine smiled, but there was something else in her eyes besides joy. Concern? A calculation? I couldn't figure it out. When's the deadline? I asked. 5 months, Elaine replied. We found out the sex last week. It's going to be a boy. A descendant of the Berkeley family, Hiram said proudly, raising his glass. To the future financier. Everyone drank again. I felt a pang of disappointment that Elaine hadn't told me about the pregnancy sooner. 5 months, and I find out at dinner with the rest of the guests, as if I'm not the father but a casual acquaintance. We're thinking of naming him Hiram, after his grandfather, Noah said, looking at his father. The older Hiram brightened, and I felt something finally shatter inside. Even in this, I was beaten. My grandson will bear the name of someone else's grandfather, a man who looks down on me and thinks my life is a failure. Great choice, I said, forcing myself to smile. Dinner continued, but I wasn't following the conversation. My thoughts revolved around the news of my grandson and the fact that Elaine hadn't seen fit to tell me earlier. It was painful to realize how distant our relationship had become. When dessert arrived, I noticed that Elaine and Noah exchanged some strange looks. Something was cooking, and it suddenly hit me. They expected me to pay for this dinner. That's why Elaine was clarifying whether I was coming by car, to make sure I had a way to get home after I emptied my wallet. That's why she was asking about the suit, so I wouldn't embarrass them in front of Noah's family. I looked around the table, the expensive wines, the exquisite food, the indifferent faces of people who didn't care about me, and my daughter, who seemed to see me only as a source of funding. The realization of this fact hit me like a freight train. My own daughter had invited me, not because she wanted to see me at a family celebration, but because she needed someone to pay the bill. And not just any bill. The bill for a lavish dinner for her husband's family, people who looked at me with poorly concealed contempt. The waiter began to remove the dessert plates, and I knew he'd bring the bill soon. My heart was pounding and my throat was dry. What was I going to do? Could I afford to pay for dinner for 7 people at the most expensive restaurant in town? Technically, yes, I had savings. But that would mean continuing a vicious cycle where Elaine uses me as an ATM machine. Dessert was over, and the tension at the table became almost palpable. I sat staring at the empty plate, feeling everything inside clench in anticipation of the inevitable. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Elaine glancing back at Noah. Hiram and Doris were still talking about their plans for the summer, a cruise to the Greek islands, 2 weeks on the Côte d'Azur. You could go away too, Edmund, Doris said with feigned concern. At your age, you should seize the moment while your health permits. I'm not much of a traveler, I replied, though the truth was that my savings were barely enough for everyday expenses, let alone foreign travel. Dad was always a homebody, Elaine put in. Even when Mom was alive, they rarely went out. That wasn't true. Linda and I loved to travel. We just did it modestly. Camping in national parks, trips to the ocean where we stayed in cheap motels. But Elaine apparently preferred to present her new in-laws with a version where her parents were unambitious hicks. Speaking of houses, Noah said suddenly, as if remembering something important. Elaine and I have decided we need a bigger house. You know, it's going to get crowded with the baby. I frowned. Their current house was 3 bedrooms, with a spacious living room and garden. Not a palace, of course, but more than enough for a young family with 1 child. We've got a great one in the Highlands, Noah continued. 4 bedrooms, pool, mountain views. Perfect for a growing family. Highlands was Socorro's most expensive neighborhood, home to doctors, lawyers, and businessmen. Houses there cost 3 or 4 times as much as in other parts of the city. Sounds great, I said, knowing where this was going. Yeah, but the down payment's a little tricky. Noah paused, looking at me. The bank requires 20%, and that's a lot of money. Dad, Elaine put her hand on mine. We thought you might be able to help. You know, like an investment in your grandson's future. You want him to grow up in a good neighborhood, with the opportunity to go to a better school, don't you? I looked at my daughter, and for a moment I saw her as a stranger. Where was that little girl who collected fossils and dreamed of becoming a paleontologist? What happened to the teenager who vowed never to become a materialist? Elaine, we can discuss this later, in private, I said quietly, feeling uncomfortable about discussing family financial matters at the holiday table. Sure, Dad, she smiled, but I could see the impatience in her eyes. Just keep in mind, we need to make a decision by the end of the month or the house will go to other buyers. I understand, I nodded, already knowing my answer would be no. Even if I sold my house, it wouldn't be enough for a down payment in the Highlands. The waiter approached the table. Can I get you a coffee or a digestive? He asked. No, thank you, Hiram replied, speaking for everyone. I think we're ready for the bill. The waiter nodded and left. The conversation at the table became unnaturally quiet. Noah suddenly became very interested in the pattern on the tablecloth, and Agatha and her husband began to gather as if saying goodbye, even though the bill had not yet arrived. Great night, Hiram said, addressing everyone but me. Noah, happy birthday, son. You deserve all the best. Elaine looked tense. She sat with her back straightened and cast quick glances at me, as if assessing my mood. I began to realize that the plan was obvious to everyone present except me. I was to pay for dinner, and then, preferably, agree to finance their new home. The waiter returned with a leather folder containing the bill. He placed it exactly in the middle of the table, between Hiram and me. There was an awkward pause. No one was reaching for the bill. It was as if everyone was waiting for something, or someone. I slowly realized that all eyes were on me. Even the waiter paused in anticipation, as if he'd been told I was the one who would be paying. My heart beat faster and my throat felt dry. Let's see. I reached for the folder, determined to at least know the amount before I made a decision. When I opened the account, I felt the ground go from under my feet. The amount was astronomical, more than my pension for 3 months. Expensive wines, exquisite dishes, all those appetizers and desserts. The Berkeley family seemed to have deliberately ordered the most expensive things on the menu, knowing that they wouldn't be the ones paying. I closed the folder and placed it on the table. Memories flashed through my mind. How I'd paid for Elaine's college while working 2 jobs. How Linda and I had saved for everything so my daughter could attend a good university. How I'd withdrawn money from my retirement account to help with the down payment on their current house. How I'd paid for their car repairs just 3 months ago. And now this. They expected me to pay for a lavish dinner for people who barely dignified me with a glance, and then agree to give up my last savings for a house in an upscale neighborhood that I might not even be invited to visit. Something inside me broke. Or maybe it was the other way around, falling into place. I slowly rose from the table. I have to go, I said calmly. Dad? Elaine looked at me with a puzzled expression. Where are you going? Home, I replied, putting on my jacket. Elaine threw a panicked look at Noah, then looked at me again. But we're not done yet, she said, clearly referring to the unpaid bill. I'm done, I replied, heading for the exit. Daddy, where are you going? Her voice grew louder with a hint of anger and panic in it. I was counting on you to pay my bill. I stopped and slowly turned around. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Patrons at neighboring tables stopped talking and turned in our direction. The waiters froze with their trays. Elaine stood with her fists clenched, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Your bill? I asked quietly, but my voice was clearly audible in the silence. Or the bill of your husband's family, who ordered the most expensive food and wine knowing that I would pay. It's Noah's birthday, Elaine exclaimed. Can't you do even this small thing for your family? A little thing? I felt something cold and hard forming inside. A little thing is an amount equal to my 3-month pension. A smallness is a dinner bill that costs more than I spend on food in 6 months. Elaine looked like I'd punched her. Hiram and Doris exchanged glances full of contempt. Noah sat with his eyes down, clearly not wanting to get involved in the conflict. "You know, Elaine," I continued, surprised at the calmness in my voice, "I've helped you many times. Paid for your college even though Mom and I had to take out a loan. Gave you money for the down payment on your current house. Paid for your wedding, which cost more than I made in a year. Took money out of your retirement account 3 months ago so you could get your car repaired." I paused, looking directly into my daughter's eyes. "And not once in the last few years have you called just to ask how I was. Didn't come over without asking for money. Never invited me to a dinner where I wasn't expected to pay." "Dad, that's not true," Elaine began, but her voice trembled. She knew I was telling the truth. "I've loved you from the moment you were born," I said, feeling a lump come up in my throat. "And I'll love you until my last day. But I won't be your ATM anymore. I won't pay bills for people who look down on me. And I won't give you money for a house in the Highlands that you can afford if you cut back a little on restaurants and designer clothes." There was absolute silence in the hall. I could see people at neighboring tables glancing around, the waiters trying to pretend they weren't listening. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was saying what I really thought. You're just jealous," Elaine blurted out, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Jealous that Noah and I have something you never had." "No, Elaine," I shook my head. "I had what you may never have, a marriage based on love, not financial gain. A home, albeit modest, but filled with warmth, not designer furniture. And a daughter I loved more than life, even when she stopped seeing me as anything more than a source of money." Elaine stood with her mouth open, unable to find the words. Noah finally looked up, and in his eyes I saw a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Hiram sat stone-faced, and Doris looked like she'd swallowed something sour. "Pay the bill yourself," I said, heading for the exit. "You have enough money for expensive watches and designer handbags, so you'll have enough for dinner." I walked through the restaurant, feeling the stares of the customers. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care what anyone else thought. I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. A valet stopped me at the door. "Your car, sir," he said, holding out his keys. I took the keys, left him a small tip, not luxurious, but decent, and stepped out into the cool evening air. My old Ford was waiting out front, shabby but reliable like myself. As I sat behind the wheel, I found my hands shaking. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still circulating through my body. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. What had I done? Severed my relationship with my only daughter? Deprived myself of seeing my future grandchild? But even those thoughts couldn't overshadow the sense of rightness of what I'd done. For too long I'd let Elaine use me. For too long I'd ignored the obvious that I was just a convenient source of money for her. I started the car and drove out of the restaurant parking lot. Nighttime Socorro greeted me with empty streets and flashing traffic lights. As I drove past the park where I had once walked with little Elaine, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away with the back of my hand. No, I'm not going to cry. Not today. At home, the first thing I did was to take off my suit and change into my usual jeans and flannel shirt. I hung the suit in the closet, hoping I'd wear it next time for a nicer occasion. Maybe a meeting of the astronomy club? Or dinner with Beverly Thornton if I had the courage to invite her. I sat in the living room chair, looking at Linda's picture. What would she say about tonight? Would she approve of what I'd done, or would she reproach me for being harsh? Linda had always been softer than me, always looking for compromise. But even she had noticed in recent years how Elaine manipulated us. "We've raised a spoiled princess, Eddie," she said, one day after Elaine had called asking for payment for her vacation in the Bahamas. "Maybe it's time to stop indulging her and let her realize that money doesn't grow on trees." I didn't listen then. I told her it was the only way I could see my daughter, that without our financial infusion, she would stop talking to us altogether. Linda shook her head but didn't argue. She always respected my decisions, even when she thought they were wrong. The phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out. 5 missed calls from Elaine and a message. How could you do this to me? Embarrass me in front of Noah's whole family. I'm pregnant and you're making such a scene. I didn't respond. What could I say? Apologize. For what? For finally telling the truth? Or pretend it never happened and start sponsoring her life again? No, it was time to end it. It was time to start living my own life, not existing as an appendage to my daughter's life, as a convenient ATM she could use at will. I turned my phone off and set it aside. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow I would think about what to do next. And today, I just wanted to sit in silence and get used to the idea that for the first time in years, I had done what I thought was right, not what was expected of me. Strangely, instead of being devastated, I felt a kind of relief, like I'd dropped a heavy backpack I'd been carrying around for years. Yes, it hurt. Yes, I may have lost a daughter. But at the same time, it was as if I had gotten myself back, the Edmund Hickman who had once had an opinion of his own and had not been afraid to speak it. The clock on the wall showed almost midnight. Outside the window, the city was quieting down, preparing for a new day. I walked over to the window and looked out at the starry sky. Linda always said that the stars reminded her how small our problems were on the scale of the universe. Today, I understood what she meant. The morning after the incident at the restaurant began unusually. I woke up at 6 in the morning, though I usually slept until 8. Dawn was barely breaking outside the window, and the city of Socorro still lay in semi-darkness. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of last night in my head. The scene in the restaurant seemed unreal, as if it were an episode from a movie, not my life. I got out of bed and headed for the kitchen, turning on the coffee maker and pulling out a cup. My hands were shaking a little, but not from nerves as I first thought, but from a strange excitement. I felt like I'd dropped a heavy weight I'd been carrying around on my shoulders for years. My cell phone, which I had turned off last night, was lying on the kitchen table. I turned it on and immediately received notifications. 12 missed calls and 8 messages, all from Elaine. Not wanting to start the day with that, I put the phone away and went out on the back porch with a cup of coffee. The morning was cool but pleasant. The San Mateo Mountains on the horizon were already illuminated by the first rays of sunlight, their peaks glowing pink and gold. Linda loved sunrises like this. "Every day is a new beginning, Eddie," she used to say. "It's never too late to change what you don't like about your life." I took a sip of coffee and felt a warmth spill into my chest. It's never too late. Even at 65, when many people have already resigned themselves to the idea that life is going downhill, even after so many years of the habit of being used, of being an ATM for my own daughter. Back at the house, I finally decided to read the messages from Elaine. The first few were angry. "How could you embarrass me like that? I will never forgive you for that scene. Do you realize the position you put us in with Noah's parents?" Then the tone changed to accusatory. "You're a terrible father if you can do that to your pregnant daughter. Mom would never approve of your behavior. Do you really feel that bad for your own daughter?" The last message, sent around 3 a.m., was already threatening. "If you don't apologize and reimburse the cost of dinner, you can forget you have a daughter, and you'll never see your grandchild either." I put the phone away, feeling my heart clench with pain. Despite everything, Elaine was my only daughter, my only child. The thought of never seeing her or my future grandchild was agonizing. But then I remembered all the years of manipulation, all the times Elaine had called just to ask for money, never interested in my life, my feelings. Even now, in those messages, there wasn't a word about her missing me or being sad about our fight. Just anger, accusations, and attempts to make me feel guilty. I decided not to respond to the messages. At least not now, not when the emotions were still too strong. Instead, I went about my usual morning chores, showered, shaved, made a simple breakfast. Strangely, I felt calmer and more confident than I had in many months, maybe even years. At 10 o'clock, I decided to take a walk to the town library. It was a clear, sunny day, and I wanted to get out of the house and get some fresh air. On the way, I met Beverly Thornton, my neighbor, who was walking her terrier. "Edmund," she waved at me. "It's a beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Beautiful indeed," I replied, stopping beside her. "You look different today," Beverly said, tilting her head to the side. "More, I don't know, centered or something." I smiled. Beverly was always observant. "I think I've finally made some decisions I should have made a long time ago." "Oh, that's wonderful." She was genuinely pleased. "Life is too short to put off important decisions, isn't it?" "Yes," I nodded. "That's what Linda always said." We talked a little about the weather, about a new exhibit at the local museum that Beverly had recommended. Then she asked if I wanted to join her and her friends for dinner on Friday. "Nothing special, just a small gathering of people our age. It will be nice to have another intelligent conversationalist," she said. I agreed, feeling mildly excited at the prospect of new social contacts. Since Linda's death, I had pretty much stopped socializing with people except out of necessity. Maybe it was time to change that. At the library, I picked up a few books on astronomy and one on photography, another hobby I had once been interested in but had abandoned after Linda's passing. As I walked back home, I could almost physically feel new possibilities, new paths opening up around me. As I approached my house, I noticed a familiar car in the driveway, Noah's silver Audi. My heart jumped. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, at least not so soon. Noah sat on the porch steps, tapping his foot impatiently on the concrete. When he saw me, he stood up, his face tense, his lips pressed into a thin line. "We need to talk, Edmund," he said without greeting. I nodded and opened the door, letting him inside. Noah had never been in my house alone before, without Elaine. He looked around with ill-concealed disdain, as if assessing the old furniture, the worn carpet, the bookshelves filled with tattered volumes. "Have a seat," I suggested, pointing to the couch in the living room. Noah remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. "I'm not here for small talk," he said. "What you did yesterday was unforgivable. You humiliated my wife. You embarrassed my family in front of my parents. You ruined my birthday." I looked at him, wondering how I hadn't noticed this narcissism before, this certainty that the whole world should revolve around him. "What do you suggest I do, Noah?" I asked calmly. "First, pay the bill you left us yesterday." He pulled a folded piece of paper out of his jacket pocket and handed it to me. "Here's a copy. As you can see, the amount is impressive." I took the sheet and looked at the figures. Indeed, the sum was huge, the equivalent of my 3 monthly pensions. "Secondly," Noah continued, "you owe Elaine an apology. She's pregnant, in a sensitive state, and you made a scene in front of the whole restaurant. She cried all night." I folded the sheet and put it on the coffee table. "And thirdly, I suppose you still expect me to give you money for a house in the Highlands?" I asked with slight irony. Noah tensed slightly but quickly pulled himself together. "That's a separate issue," he said. "But yes, we're still hoping for your help. After all, this is your grandson's future we're talking about." I sat back in my chair, feeling suddenly tired. Not physical, but some deep, soulful weariness from the whole situation. "Noah," I began, trying to speak calmly and reasonably, "I'm not paying this bill. I didn't invite you to this restaurant. I didn't choose the menu. I didn't order expensive wines. If you and your family wanted to celebrate your birthday in luxury, that's your right, but the expense should be yours as well." Noah's face turned red with anger. "Are you serious?" His voice got higher with indignation. After everything Elaine and I have done for you. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. What exactly have you done for me, Noah? Remind me, please. He hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting such a question. We visit you. We invite you to family events. Elaine calls you every week. You visited me twice in the last year, I said, curling my fingers. Both times to ask for money. I was invited to a family function for the first time yesterday, and that, as it turned out, only to pay the bill. As for Elaine's calls, yes, she does. When the car broke down, when the roof leaked, when I needed money for a new TV. But not once has she called just to ask how I'm doing, what I'm doing, if I'm lonely. Noah looked puzzled, as if he couldn't figure out what any of this had to do with our conversation. It's not fair, he finally said. Elaine cares about you. She always talks about you with respect. Really? I couldn't hold back a skeptical chuckle. Then why did she lie to her mother-in-law when she said Linda and I never traveled? Why is she ashamed of my profession? Why hasn't she invited me to your house once in the last 6 months? Noah was clearly beginning to lose his patience. Look, Edmund, I didn't come here for a philosophical discussion. I need a concrete answer. Are you going to pay the bill or not? No, I said firmly. And I'm not giving you money for a house in the Highlands. Not because I don't love Elaine or don't want what's best for my future grandchild. It's because it's time you both learn to live within your means and stop treating me like an ATM machine. Noah looked at me as if I'd said something in a foreign language. You don't understand, he said finally. If you don't help us with the house, we won't be able to buy it. And this is the best neighborhood for a child. Your current house is more than adequate for a family with one child, I replied. A 3-bedroom house with a garden. Many people can only dream of such a thing. But not in that neighborhood, Noah exclaimed, as if that explained everything. It's not the Highlands. So what? I grew up in much more modest circumstances, in a much less prestigious neighborhood. I got an education, became a teacher, lived a happy life with the woman I loved. A teacher, Noah muttered with such disdain that I felt anger rising inside me. Yes, a teacher, I said, trying to stay calm. A man who spent 32 years helping children understand the world around them, helping them discover the beauty of science, preparing them for colleges and universities. I'm proud of my profession, Noah. I wish you and Elaine could understand that. Noah shook his head as if he were talking to an unreasonable child. You know what, Edmund? I can see that this conversation is useless. You're an old, stubborn man who doesn't understand how the modern world works. But think about this. If you don't help us now, don't complain later that you can't see your grandson. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you threatening me? I asked quietly. Not threatening, just stating a fact, Noah replied with a cold smile. Elaine is very upset with your behavior. She doesn't want to see you, and she has my full support. So you either make up for last night's dinner and help with the house, or you can forget about your grandson. I looked at my son-in-law, the man my only daughter married, the father of my future grandson, and saw only a cold, calculating manipulator. How could Elaine fall in love with such a man? What did she see in him? I think you'd better leave, Noah, I said, rising from my chair. I don't give in to blackmail. I never have, and I'm not going to start now. You're going to regret this, Noah gritted through his teeth, heading for the exit. You're going to regret it. Maybe, I answered. But I'll regret it by being true to myself, not by selling my self-esteem for the chance to see my grandson. If Elaine is so mercantile that she's willing to cut off her father's contact with his grandson for money, then maybe I just didn't raise her well. Noah gave me one last contemptuous glance and walked out, slamming the door so hard that the glass in the windows rattled. I heard him start the car and drive off with the roar of the engine, as if trying to take his anger out on the gas pedal. I sat back in my chair, feeling oddly devastated. Noah's threat to deprive me of seeing my grandson had been painful, but not unexpected. I knew Elaine and Noah were capable of such a thing. They had already used every leverage available: guilt, obligation, family ties. All that was left was this final, most brutal manipulation. But something changed in me after last night. It was as if I finally woke up from a long sleep, saw reality for what it was, not what I wanted it to be. My daughter was no longer the inquisitive, kind girl I remembered. She had turned into a calculating, materialistic woman for whom her relationship with her father was just another resource to be exploited. The thought was painful, but liberating at the same time. I no longer had to pretend that everything was okay, that our relationship was normal. I could finally admit the truth and move on. I picked up my phone and wrote a quick message to Elaine. "I will always love you no matter what you do to me, but I won't be your ATM anymore. If you are ready for a true father-daughter relationship based on mutual respect and caring, not financial transactions, my door is always open. If not, I understand your choice and respect it." As I sent the message, I felt something complete inside me. Some long, painful process had finally come to an end. I didn't know if Elaine would respond, if anything would change in our relationship, but I knew I had made the right choice for me. I spent the rest of the day leafing through astronomy books and photographs I'd borrowed from the library. In the evening, I called the local community center to find out the meeting schedule for the astronomy club. It turned out that they meet every Wednesday evening, and sometimes go out of town on weekends to observe the stars. "Newcomers are always welcome," said the woman on the other end of the line, "especially if you have a background or interest in physics. We are just about to plan a series of educational lectures for local school children." I thanked her for the information and promised to come to the next meeting. Then, on a sudden impulse, I pulled an old camera out of the closet, a gift from Linda for my 50th birthday. It was a film camera, outdated by today's standards, but still working. I ran my fingers over the body, remembering how Linda and I used to go out to photograph sunsets over the San Mateo Mountains, how I used to take pictures of Elaine at school parties and sporting events. Maybe it was time to get back to that hobby, to start capturing the beauty of the world around me instead of dwelling on the losses and disappointments. I put the camera on the shelf next to the TV as a reminder of the new endeavor. Then I made myself a simple dinner, an omelet with vegetables, one of the few recipes I'd mastered since Linda's death. I ate while looking out the window at the sunset that colored the sky in shades of pink and orange. In the evening, the phone vibrated again. I expected to see a reply from Elaine, but it was Beverly Thornton. "Forgot to clarify about Friday. Dinner at 7, casual dress. Nothing formal. The address is 23 Cedar Street. I look forward to meeting you." I smiled and sent a short reply, confirming I'd be there. Life went on, maybe not in the way I had planned or expected, but it went on. And it still had opportunities for new acquaintances, new interests, new joys. Before going to bed, I checked my cell phone one more time. There was no answer from Elaine. I didn't know if she had read my message, pondered it, or just decided to ignore it. Either way, the decision was now up to her. I made my choice and felt at peace. During the night, I dreamed of Linda. We were sitting on the back porch looking at the stars, as we had done hundreds of times in her lifetime. She smiled at me with that special smile that always warmed my heart. "You finally did it, Eddie," she said in my dream. "Finally decided to live for yourself and not for others." I awoke with a sense of peace and clarity. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Not as Elaine's father, not as a former physics teacher, not as Linda Hickman's widower, but as Edmund Hickman, a man who still had his own life, his own desires and possibilities. It's amazing how quickly 3 months can fly by when life is full of meaning. On this June morning, I was standing in the backyard of my house, setting up my camera tripod, preparing to capture the sunrise over the San Mateo Mountains. The soft pre-dawn light was already coloring the horizon in soft pink tones, promising a gorgeous shot. A lot had changed since that evening at the Moonlight restaurant. Externally, my house looked the same worn porch steps, the same small garden I'd learned to keep in decent shape. But inside, both in the house and in myself, there were striking changes. The living room now had a large table with photographic printing supplies, a gift from the members of the photography club I had joined 2 months ago. On the walls hung my own work, landscapes of Socorro and the surrounding area, portraits of new friends, macro shots of flowers from Beverly's garden. In the corner of the garage stood a developer, an expensive but worthwhile purchase I'd made after selling the old china set that Linda and I had received as a wedding gift but never used. After taking a few pictures of the rising sun, I went back into the house to make breakfast. On the kitchen table was a lesson plan for the day, a habit I had acquired over the past few months. Morning, develop film from yesterday's trip to the canyon. Noon, lunch with Beverly at the new Main Street Cafe. Evening, astronomy club meeting at the community center preparing for the upcoming meteor shower observation. I smiled looking at that list. My days used to be empty, filled only with the occasional class with students and endless hours in front of the TV. Now each day had structure, purpose, joy. My phone vibrated, a message from Beverly. "Don't forget, there's a new chef in the cafeteria today. They say his cheesecake is amazing." I sent a short reply, looking forward to it. I'll bring pictures from the canyon. My friendship with Beverly was one of the most unexpected and pleasant life changes I've ever experienced. We weren't a couple in the romantic sense, at least not yet, but we spent a lot of time together, shared stories about our late spouses, and supported each other in trying to learn to live again. After breakfast, I went to the makeshift darkroom in the garage. Developing film required concentration and patience, qualities I had once had in abundance as a physics teacher, but which I had almost lost in the years since Linda's death. Now they were returning, along with the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands. When the negatives were finished, I hung them to dry and headed out to meet Beverly. The walk through Socorro was pleasant. I nodded to acquaintances, stopped to talk to former students, whom I met much more often now that I'd stopped avoiding public places. The Morning Dew Cafe had only opened a month ago, but it was already a popular spot with the locals. Beverly was waiting for me at a table by the window, elegant in a simple summer dress, her short gray hair neatly arranged around her face. "Edmund," she waved her hand at me. I had already ordered tea for us. We spent lunch discussing my new photographs, her progress on growing orchids, and the astronomy club's plans for the coming summer. Beverly told me about a letter from her son in Seattle who was coming to visit for a week. "You should definitely meet Robert," she said. "He's interested in photography too, though more digitally." "I'd be glad to," I replied sincerely. Over the months I had learned to appreciate new acquaintances, new connections. After lunch we split up. Beverly to her gardening club meeting, me home to prepare for an evening astronomy meeting. As I passed the mailbox, I noticed an unstamped envelope. Someone had delivered it personally. I recognized Elaine's handwriting even before I saw the sender's name. Since our fight at the restaurant, I had received only 2 messages from my daughter. The first, a week later, was full of anger and accusations. The second, a month later, more subdued but still cold, reported that she and Noah had bought a house in the Highlands after all, taking out an additional loan. "Made it through without your help," she wrote, clearly expecting me to feel guilty or excluded. I didn't respond to any of these messages, not because I didn't miss my daughter, I certainly did, but because I knew any contact on her terms would simply return us to our previous unhealthy dynamic. I figured that if Elaine ever wanted a real, sincere relationship, she'd find a way to let me know. The envelope I held in my hands was a surprise. I opened it while standing right outside the mailbox, unable to wait until I got home. Inside was a postcard with a picture of a stork carrying a package, the traditional symbol of the birth of a child. Inside, in calligraphic handwriting, was written, "Happy to announce the birth of Hiram Edmund Berkeley, 7 pounds, 6 ounces, June 15th. Below, already in Elaine's regular handwriting, was added, "Daddy, if you want to see your grandson, call Elaine." I stared at the card, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. My grandson had been born, and they had given him my name as his middle name. What did that mean? An olive branch? An attempt at reconciliation? Or just another way of manipulation? At home, I put the card on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time, pondering. Part of me wanted to call immediately, to tell her I'd be there in 15 minutes, to see this little man who carried a piece of me, a piece of Linda. But the other part remembered Noah's threats, remembered the years of manipulation, remembered how easily I could fall into the same trap again. I decided to wait until tonight, to think things through. The astronomy club meeting would help clear my thoughts. Looking at the stars had always given me perspective. At 7 in the evening, I was at the community center, where the club members had already gathered. A motley group of enthusiasts of all ages, from high school students to retirees even older than me. Within 3 months, I had become a full-fledged member of this community. I was valued for my knowledge of physics, my ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms, and the enthusiasm with which I participated in all the activities. "Edmund, you seem distracted today," said Carol, the 70-year-old club leader, when I miscalculated for the 3rd time for an upcoming observation. "Is something wrong?" I told her about the birth of my grandson and showed her the card I had brought with me. Carol listened, nodding, her wise eyes looking at me with understanding. "It's a difficult situation," she said, "but you know what I think? A child is not to blame for the actions of his parents, and he has the right to know his grandfather." "I think so too," I replied. "But I'm afraid Elaine and Noah are just using him as bait to get access to my wallet again." "Maybe," Carol agreed. "But you don't have to give them money to see your grandson, do you? Set boundaries. Say you want to be part of the child's life, but your financial situation hasn't changed." It was sound advice. After the meeting, driving home under the stars, I continued to ponder the situation. By the time I reached my house, the decision was made. I called Elaine. Noah answered the phone, his voice sounding wary. "Ah, Edmund," he said without greeting, "you got our card." "Yes," I answered. "Congratulations on the birth of your son. May I speak to Elaine?" "She's resting," he said, a touch of smugness in his voice. "You know, childbirth is no joke." "Sure," I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Please tell her I called, and that I'd like to see my grandson when it's convenient." There was a pause, then Noah said, "Actually, we're in a pretty tough financial situation right now. Baby expenses, house loan payments. You know how it is. Here it is." I almost smiled, so predictable it was. "I'd like to see my grandson, Noah," I repeated firmly. "But my financial situation hasn't changed since the last time we talked. I'm retired, my income is limited, and I can't help you financially." "Then I don't know if we can organize a meeting," Noah replied coldly. "We are very busy, and traveling to your part of town takes a lot of time." "I could come to your place," I suggested. "Or we could meet in the park, at a cafe, anywhere that would be convenient for Elaine." "We'll see," Noah replied uncertainly. "I'll tell Elaine you called." After that conversation, I went out to the backyard where I set up my old telescope. The night was clear, perfect for stargazing. I pointed the telescope at Jupiter, the brightest planet in the sky this evening. Through the eyepiece, the streaks on the giant planet's surface and its 4 largest satellites were clearly visible. Looking at this picture, I thought of my newborn grandson, little Hiram Edmund, whom I may never truly know. It hurt, of course, but it was no longer as sharp as it used to be. During those 3 months, I learned to find joy in other aspects of life, to build relationships that weren't based on manipulation and guilt. The next 2 weeks passed without hearing from Elaine or Noah. I continued on with my new life, taking pictures, participating in astronomy club activities, having lunch with Beverly, even starting to teach basic physics principles to a group of interested club members. And then, one Saturday, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Elaine with a baby carrier in her hand. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but generally seemed healthy. "Hi, Daddy," she said quietly. "Meet your grandson." I stepped aside silently, letting her into the house. Elaine walked into the living room, set the carrier on the couch, and carefully removed a small package. A tiny creature with a red, wrinkled face and a tuft of dark hair on the top of its head. "Do you want to hold it?" Elaine asked, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. She handed the baby to me, showing me how to properly support the head. I looked at that little face, those tiny hands, and felt something turn over inside. My grandchild, part of me, part of Linda, even part of Elaine, the Elaine I once knew and loved. "He's beautiful," I said finally. "Thank you for bringing him over." Elaine nodded, then looked around, noticing the changes in the house, the pictures on the walls, the new books on the shelves, the general order that hadn't been there before. "It's different," she said. "Yes," I answered simply. "A lot has changed in the last few months." We sat in silence for a while, me holding the baby, Elaine looking out the window. Then she said, "Daddy, we need your help, financially. Our loan payments are more than we bargained for, and with the baby, I won't be able to work full-time for at least 3 months." I looked at my daughter, at her tired face, at the way she nervously tugged at the hem of her blouse, a gesture she had adopted from Linda, and I felt not anger, not disappointment, just a quiet confidence. "No, Elaine," I said softly, "I can't help you with money. Not because I don't love you or the baby, it's because it won't solve your problems. You and Noah need to learn to live within your means. Maybe even consider moving to a smaller house if you can't afford your current one." Elaine straightened, a familiar look of resentment and anger on her face. "So you haven't changed your mind, even for your grandson's sake?" "Especially for my grandson," I replied. "I want to be a part of his life. I want him to know his grandfather. But not as an ATM, but as someone who can teach him to look at the stars, to take pictures, to understand how the world works." Elaine took the baby from my arms, gently tucked him back into the carrier. "I thought you'd change when you saw him," she said bitterly. "I thought you'd realize how important it was to give him the best." "The best isn't always the most expensive, Elaine," I replied. "It's love, attention, values, things that money can't buy." She shook her head as if I were speaking a language she didn't understand. "I have to go," she said, picking up the carrier. "Noah's waiting in the car." "You can come any time," I said, walking her to the door, with or without the baby, just to talk, to spend time together. "My door is always open to you, Elaine, but my wallet isn't." She left without looking back. I stood on the porch, watching her get into the car with Noah waiting behind the wheel. They drove away, and I didn't know if I'd ever see them again, or, more importantly, whether I would see my grandson again. But in a strange way, I felt at peace. I had done what I thought was right, not for me, but for all of us, for Elaine and Noah, who needed to learn financial responsibility, for little Hiram Edmond, who deserved parents who could stand on their own 2 feet, and for myself, a man who had finally learned to respect himself enough not to let others take advantage of him. In the evening, I went out into the backyard again with the telescope. The night was exceptionally clear, with the Milky Way spread out overhead in a wide silvery ribbon. I tuned the telescope to the constellation Lyra, home to the famous Ring Nebula, a remnant of a dead star that nevertheless shines with unearthly beauty. Looking at this cosmic wonder, I thought about the cycles of life, the birth and death of stars, the coming of new generations and the passing of old ones. about how loss can be the beginning of something new. 3 months ago, I thought I had lost my daughter. In a way, maybe I had. But instead, I found myself, not just a father, not just a widower, but a whole person with his own interests, friends, goals. At 65, I began a new chapter of my life. Not the one I had planned or expected, but perhaps just the one I needed. And who knew what else lay ahead? Maybe in time Elaine would understand my position. Maybe we'd find a way to build a new, healthier relationship. Maybe I would become a part of my grandson's life after all. Or maybe I won't. And with that thought, I learned to live in peace, too. I stepped away from the telescope and looked at the starry sky with the naked eye. The universe was vast, full of possibilities and wonders, and my life, no matter how small it seemed on a cosmic scale, was still my own, to live it the way I thought was right. I smiled at the stars and returned to the house, where new photos lay on the table waiting to be sorted. Books stood on the shelf waiting to be read, and the calendar was marked with plans for tomorrow, for the next week, for the months ahead. Plans of a man who had decided to live life to the fullest, regardless of age or circumstance. A man who had finally realized that it was never too late to start living for himself.